Okay, you guys are good to go.
Thanks, Paige. Well, I'm excited to be here for another week with OLAAT Chats. Thank you, Megan Ramsey, my friend, for joining us. Megan is both a friend of OLAAT, and also you have come to help on one of the libraries that we worked on. So for this week, we thought it would be a little bit fun to try to show what it's like to develop a project from the Peace Corps perspective. I know in a few of the chats we've talked about how we work with Peace Corps, but it happens that I was in Peace Corps for a couple of years, which is also why Megan's presence is valuable, because she was my friend through the whole process.
The whole lengthy process.
Oh, it was. I mean, I was pretty much consumed with it our senior year of college, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was quite the process for everyone involved, but at least we got the payoff of you getting in. So
right, and you can visit, and you can visit.
Basically free trip to Panama, so it was great.
It all paid off. I think the funny part was when I first applied, I thought the first thought in my head was, I think I'll throw up an application and see what happens at the beginning of our senior year. And it was anything but the throwing up of anything. I mean, it was like, I felt like I spent 100 hours that September of our senior year working on it. And I'm sure you read more essays than you've ever felt the need to.
At least you're a good writer, so.
Oh, man. But I think I've streamlined the process a lot since I went to Peace Corps. I mean, it was about 1.5 years from when I started until I actually got there. And and I served in Panama from 2013 to 15. So it's been, 7 years since I left?
Something like that.
So I got really involved with the library project. And so I thought it would be fun to chat a little bit and get Megan to be in the interviewer seat to help us kind of go through the timeline of what it was like to develop a project for Peace Corps, because we work with Peace Corps a lot in Panama, but I don't know if everyone knows what it's like for the third party that we're working with a lot, to actually see the project come to fruition. There is so much in between and so much preparation that comes to even get ready for one library at a time to come help a Peace Corps volunteer. So anyway, thank you for guest interviewing, Megan.
Anytime.
Usually it's the other way around.
Happy to be here. So it's my first interview, so you'll have to bear with me, but I'd love to kind of get a little more background. I mean, I'm sure you and I talked about it, but it's been a while. So what was it that inspired, starting the library? What was going on at your site before you got there? Can you give us a little background?
Yeah. So just as I thought that I would throw up an application to Peace Corps, I heard someone mention in passing whenever I was in the application process that, they knew somebody who'd gone down to the Dominican and started a library. And that's about all I needed to think that, it would be a great project for me to do too. And so that, that seed just sort of planted in my head. And I thought through the whole process, like, wouldn't it be cool to develop a library? Because it's something, physical you can walk away from and see the product, right? Which is not always a blessing of all the project development that gets done in Peace Corps. And so I kind of had that in my head. And then in Peace Corps, how it works is that you do a couple of months of training in a site, and then they put you in a specific community for 2 years. Well, in your training, you have this one-on-one with a supervisor, and you're supposed to say the kind of things that you want, right? Like if you want a big town or a small town, and there's no guarantee you're going to get it, but it's kind of like the situation that you want, right? So like I was looking in my journal from then, and I was a teaching English volunteer in the education sector. So Peace Corps has education and environment and health. It has various sectors. And then inside the sectors, there's various projects related to the country that you're assigned to, right?
Mhm.
So in Panama, there's teaching English because there's a lot of tourism and it's like good for them to learn a second language. I didn't really want to be in the classroom. That was from the beginning. I just never wanted to be in the classroom. And so in my journal, I wrote, like, I was doing some brainstorming before I had my one-on-one with a supervisor. And like the 3 projects ideas that I wrote down were cross-sectoral, meaning anything to do but education.
Outside the class.
Well, let's say anything but being in the classroom all day. And then the second one was thrift store, which
sounds so much like you. That's so good.
also says what I didn't know about the work I was going to do or what was really needed. And the third one was library project.
Yeah.
And that one really did come about.
Yeah. So was there a library at your site when you got there, or did you start it from the ground up?
Right. So because of what I told him, I think that put him on alert to put me in a site where a girl had already been making strides for the library.
Because now, were you the first volunteer at your site?
Yeah, I ended up being number 2.
Number 2.
Second volunteer.
So there was a volunteer there before you got it.
Right. And so Peace Corps works, I think, kind of like maybe other development organizations where it has kind of, the ideal is 3 waves of volunteers, 3 waves of development. And usually that's what it takes to really get a project to stick. You got your first person putting the roots in, the second person forwarding the goal, maybe seeing it come to fruition. And that third person, in my opinion, is implementing some kind of a system for it to stick.
Yeah.
That's how Peace Corps works. And does the AmeriCorps work kind of similar? I know you were.
Yeah, so I was the first volunteer in kind of our 3-year cycle, but yeah, very similar. So I started a mentoring program, and then 2 other people behind me, kind of carried it on and developed it for sure.
Okay.
Very similar process.
Yeah, so it must be. So it was kind of like that situation. So I was number 2. The volunteer that came before me, she got in and was interested in the library, but then she thought, okay, well, let's gauge interest in the community. Let's see if they're really going to use it if we try to make it.
Smart.
And so the literacy, the love of literacy that exists in a place like Cuba, which is kind of what Susan and I had talked about previously, isn't really very common in Panama. I wouldn't say they're grown up to sort of love stories and literature.
Yeah.
Or even really know what to do inside of a library. A lot of the libraries there's so much red tape to even get a book. Yeah. Like you might have a library in a school, but the librarian, all the books are behind. It's not like you can go through and touch them and pick them out and smell them and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've always been a lover of all things librarian books. So it's not that same culture. So she pivoted and really started focusing on trying to up interest in reading, and then also trying to help the teachers learn how to teach reading in English. But the library, was always going to be, I think, bilingual. But she really saw the need to sort of teach them how to read and give seminars, teachers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So she gathered a lot of resources, reading resources, but also individual books. And so she started laying the groundwork for it by the time that I came in. Okay.
And so you were about 1.5 years, I think, into your service year or service term. Sorry, I'm thinking AmeriCorps. It was a much bigger commitment than AmeriCorps. But so I came in about 1.5 years into your service term. And I remember we sort of organized, sort of laid some groundwork, it seemed like, for OLAAT. And I think they were coming like a week after I left, right?
Yeah,
sort of like that. Organized by like nonfiction. I think we not labeled yet, but at least listed all the books that that she had gathered, that you had gathered. But then so when OLAAT came on, what did they do? Because obviously I wasn't there anymore. So what did they do to help once they got there?
So OLAAT brought $1,000 worth of books and resources. That's what we still commit to do to all the libraries that we go to as one library at a time. As a Peace Corps volunteer, they brought me a section of Sydney was the volunteer that came down and who's on our board, and she brought 50, 100 pounds of books and supplies. And then when she got there, her and I went around and bought some more in Panama City.
Okay.
Which is what we often do. We bring some and then we try to buy some in the country. Because there's some stuff you just can't get specific to the culture, especially in some of the indigenous towns. So Sydney came, and what we did was we instituted the catalog system, which is, all by hand. And in some of the photos that we'll post, you'll see there's 3 catalog boxes. Mm-hmm. So Sydney and I spent hours along with some people in the community, my host family, another volunteer named Katie, who I think is in one of the pictures that was also in Peace Corps, spent hours poring over, cataloging by hand, writing on small index cards, everything that would be housed in the library. And so that's tedious work. And yeah, I'm sure on an episode, Susan and I'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what we do, but more or less it's instituting a very simplified Dewey Decimal System into the library.
Awesome.
But it was great help for me because I didn't really have a lot of support of someone else who was already in Panama who kind of knew how to do it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So once you guys kind of got the library even more off the ground, was this just for the school students or was this open to the community as well?
Yeah, so this one ended up being in a little primary school in my community called Unión de Azuero in the east of the canal in Panama. It was about, I'd say 20 teachers and 400 students. They had an afternoon and a morning session. So it was, and it was one of the only primary ones closed.
Oh, I think. Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
So it may serve to say again. Oh, sorry.
You broke up a little bit, so maybe just say where it was again.
It was in Unión de Azuero, east of the canal.
Okay.
And it mainly served in my community, and it mainly served a primary school with about 20 teachers and about 400 students.
Great.
And there was a lot of times mothers come and wait for their children to get out of school. And so Susan had come up with this idea of what to do for very little children that might not be in school yet or something like that, but they could still maybe benefit from the library. So we would put in, and we still do this in some places, a box of just board books that aren't cataloged, that stay in the library that kids can't really destroy, or it's kind of hard to destroy.
I'm surprised what little ones can destroy. Ripped out board books all over the house.
Or makes it a little harder for them to destroy the board books. And I guess I've envisioned that kind of bringing the community in, the mothers in, something to do while they were waiting for their kids. So in that way, we tried to touch the community. But the school was so big itself, it could just serve the students and the teachers. That was another main focus of mine, the teachers. Because I think often when we are doing a project, it's part of it is getting through to the adults' minds that no, reading is actually going to make your job easier as an educator.
Yeah.
And it's also could be a lot of fun for you, as an adult, even if you didn't grow up learning to love reading.
Yeah.
So that was also trying to kind of change the mindset there.
Yeah. So how was it utilized? Was it just open to teachers? Were school kids able to go in? Could they check out books and bring them home? What was that process like?
Ultimately, what Susan always says is it's however it works best for your community, right? So for us, for one library to come in and say, you have to do the system this way, it's not going to be sustainable as the community deciding. As a Peace Corps volunteer, you're kind of the sustainability factor there. And so, and you hope that you're there to sort of implement it, or the person after you is going to help to really establish it. So my goal was that yes, students could come in if they were, 5th or 6th grade by themselves, if the teacher sent them there. But I was sort of planning and aiming for there to be like a library hour for every grade section at least once a week.
Yeah, that's great.
But there was also other ways that I advocated that they use it as. Either they send a student there solo, or maybe even if it's not their library hour, maybe the teacher's going to use it for the history subject. Maybe all the kids have to do a report on an autobiography of somebody they found in the library. It wasn't a huge space, and so probably the most realistic was that the teachers go select, say, 20 books, and then they take them back to the classroom, and the kids have them there for that hour.
Yeah.
But something cool that we were trying to institute in terms of checking, like a checkout system, was like those big index cards, maybe like those 5x8 index cards, using those as library cards.
Cool.
And so kids could decorate the front with their name, and then on the back, it would show what they checked out, when it was due, so their teacher would know if they had something out of the library. And it would give a history of what they read that year. And if they didn't have it, they couldn't take a book.
Great.
So that was kind of the system that we were trying to use. In some of the very rural places, some volunteers told me that their kids they made them have like a plastic bag. And so to protect the book, especially, with in really dusty places or where the elements are more extreme, and that if they didn't have the bag, they could not check out the book. So it's really whatever is needed in the kind of climate you're at.
I'm sure it's great to have that flexibility at each site too. That sounds awesome. So I remember when I was there, I think all the books were maybe in an office or something. Was that the final location of the library, or did it stay there, or,
That is an interesting story.
Yeah, what you thought about before, because I know
that's such
a location too.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind as well.
So, we will definitely come back to answer this question, but to answer, we got to back up a little bit.
Yeah.
When I got there, in like May of 2013, I arrived in Union, and so I was supposed to serve for 2 years. And so, just to give you a little bit of a timeline, I had received directions from the previous volunteer about how the library was supposed to, what her vision was. So I showed up, and she mentioned in writing that there was a possibility of a building behind the school. And so I go to eager to see what that is. And I turn the corner, and it is about 2 or 3 feet of cement in a room form attached to another school room. And it's really like people started construction and just
stopped.
Just decide, I don't know if the funds ran out or what. And so she had said, there's a possibility that, that could be the library, but it wasn't like, there was just a carpet ready for me to show up and make that thing happen. It was, people had to be convinced that it was the best use of the library, et cetera. So, in those first couple of months, idealistic me, I think I got out a pen and paper, a sketchbook. I took measurements as if I was going to somehow, sort of teach the people how we could build this building. They did not need my help to construct. And actually, in the end, that thing ended up becoming a classroom, which was much more necessary for the school.
Yeah.
Because there was so many children there at that one.
Yeah.
But it was a long road to finally get a little place to put the library. It's kind of twofold. Physically, there needed to be a library, and then systematically, we needed to have a library, right?
Sure, yeah.
So physically, there was a couple of times, honestly, until one library time came a year and a half in, there was a couple of times where I honestly thought the project was dead. I just kind of let it go. Because I would put fillers out there. I was trying to see what would happen, and nothing would seem to pick up traction. I went through a little phase where I thought that we could do the library in like a bus, because I'd seen in Argentina how people had started redoing buses and putting libraries in them.
Cool.
I went through another phase where like a pretty big corporation sponsored our little school. And so I got in contact with one of the ladies who was with community outreach, and she took me to the port of Panama City, and we were trying to see if we could get a huge shipping container to turn into a library.
Oh, that would have been cool.
I mean, I had grandiose ideas. So there was a road of trying to figure out a physical location. And what we ended up doing was there was a little room, like a little foyer or a pre-room to the principal's office, and nobody used it. It was like a little desk, and it wasn't being used. And I'd been in there hundreds of times, over the months. And finally the wheel started turning in my head, and I thought, it's central. It's a central location. It's already got a little bit of color, like the walls already had some yellow, which not everything is always painted on the inside in Panama. And so that seemed attractive. And so I made a deal with the principal that we could have the library there until some other location was, I could find somewhere else, or it was decided, but we could put it there. So it ended up just being in the school itself, which is an interesting lesson, because sometimes what you need is literally right in front of you, but you're either too grandiose and you're thinking that couldn't be enough, just something small, or it just, you're not thinking outside the box and seeing the resources that you have right in front of you,
Yeah.
And the second thing I would say that was such an adventure was when I say systematically, I mean like the gathering of resources. So the previous volunteer had a lot of resources, but I was writing down, I was emailing National Geographic in August 2013, asking for donations. So I got there in May, and I was already on the boat trying to email National Geographic, which they don't send books everywhere in the world. So I got denied by them. Great organization, I'm sure, but they can't send it everywhere they're asked. And so so I had that. And then like Books for a Better World, who still helps a lot of Peace Corps volunteers now with books. They sent me books like the following spring. The U.S. Embassy had resources that we put into the library. I was scouting out different organizations I thought might have resources. And so I went to like the local arts and culture society.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, we have some books in the back. They'd done a book drive or something, I guess, and didn't do anything with the books. I went back and I found Tom Sawyer in Spanish, in color, in just these black plastic bags. That might have been one of the best days that I had in Peace Corps. I could not believe it. It was like a gold mine.
Yeah, that is quite the score.
So yeah, anyway, just to give an idea of what it was like to gather the resources over that amount of over that, year and a half.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, you had a lot by the time I got there. That little, because it was in the foyer space, right? When I got there, that's what the station. Yeah, I mean, it was full. I mean, there were shelves and everything. So what are some of the, this is maybe backtracking a little bit, but what are some of the like criteria that OLAAT has? What did you have to get ready before they could come?
Yeah, that's so the OLAAT basically requires three big things, which are the location needs to be secured. We're not going to come in and like sticks and build it in sticks or mortar, cement or wood. We're not going to build the structure, and you need to have shelves.
Okay.
Which is like a commitment of the community to show that you really want us there. And then the third thing is you need people taking care of the library.
Gotcha.
And got my host dad to help me, and we built some shelves. We had some shelves built, and then the location we talked about, and the taking care of the library. Because it was in the school, we ended up training all the teachers. because the way I envisioned it was that the teacher would kind of supervise the library hour for their own students, so that all the teachers needed to be trained with how it ran. But that's not the same in every site. Some places have a paid librarian.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically those three factors, I think, are what's needed for OLAAT to make a commitment to come.
Okay. And so you were the second volunteer, so was there another one after you that helped with that sort of follow-up, and have you been back?
Yeah, this is where my story kind of diverts from the normal Peace Corps volunteer. There was some safety issues in my site, and so Peace Corps decided that they needed to move me to another community, that I couldn't really finish the service there, and which is not typical in Peace Corps. But because OLAAT had already, they were really awesome, and they'd already committed to helping me with the library. They said, okay, Susan and I talked, and Sydney, the volunteer that came down, talked, and they said, okay, we're going to help you finish it, because we realize this is not the most sustainable situation, but the whole project is already in motion. I mean, we had gathered, in terms of numbers, with what OLAAT ended up bringing down, we had over 2,000 books and resources in the end. Yeah. And so they kind of, it was a very unique event for One Library at a Time. It was a unique event for Peace Corps, but they came down and they helped me finish the library. We put the system in, we trained the teachers, and then I was moved to another community. So in an ideal world, there was going to be a volunteer after me, and she or he was going to help implement the system, really solidly into the school's, daily function. And it didn't happen that way. But I am thankful that, we gave to the community, we gave what we said we were going to give. And everyone who'd already been invested and heard about it too, there was, something to be left there when I had to leave.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so do you guys work with Peace Corps quite a bit? You may have mentioned that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we work with Peace Corps quite a bit. And I've been back a few times to Union. So the first time I went back, which was, I think I was like finishing up my service with Peace Corps in the country of Panama. And I just kind of wanted to see what was happening with the library. The first time I went back, I wasn't very encouraged because they had put it in like a back room, and I thought it was like kind of too dusty of a situation. I wasn't crazy about it. But when I went back the second time, my host sister and I were looking in all the windows of the school, and we started seeing like books in different rooms. And then in one room, we saw Lectora de Rincón, which means reading corner. And I started kind of piecing together like, oh, maybe, because I didn't really see much of that, like a reading corner, much of promotion of literature, promotion of reading time, that kind of thing, which is really the goal in the end anyway, right? It's a promotion of literacy and kids learning about the world and the world outside themselves. And so I think kind of what I saw was maybe it didn't end what I originally envisioned, or, our goal is always to have a sustainable library. But maybe what happened was several people were affected and their mindset was changed, that then ends up changing mindsets of various students they're going to teach, and the way they teach. And so I was very encouraged to see, kind of like a reading corner, and seeing the resources divided up between them, because if that's the way it works for that situation or that school, then that's what it needs to be. It was a great silver lining for a situation that, ended up unplanned.
Yeah, great. I think that's all the questions I had. Are there any final thoughts or anything you want to share with your listeners?
I do think it's funny how Susan and I got connected, and she's related to me by marriage, like my mother's cousin. And the funny part was, I had like tried to make something happen with the library the first couple of months I was there, and nothing was happening. I kind of let it die. And then Susan emailed me because she had seen my mother at a family funeral.
All places.
And they started talking about, what are your kids up to? What are your kids up to? And my mother said, well, Rachel's in Peace Corps trying to develop a library. And Susan was like, Becky, that's what I'm doing now, because Susan had started one library at a time. And so it was just a very interesting connection. And even from the first time Susan emailed me till they came, it was still well over a year.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives an idea too of how long we, one library at a time, are talking to Peace Corps volunteers, or how long we're talking to third parties that we're working with.
Yeah.
Often for a year, maybe several years, sometimes faster.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Susan was definitely some support, and one library at a time was some support that I needed to keep going in the process, So I was thankful for that. So yeah, I did want to mention the chance meeting. Well, I don't think it was chance, but the interesting connection, and then how it got to me.
Yeah.
When I was living in Panama.
Yeah. It sounds like it was a success overall. The library that you started. That's awesome.
Yeah. And wait, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What did you think of this kind of assist? I think you brought books to the little to my little library.
Yeah.
I'm sure you loaded you up.
I remember meeting your mom. I think I was in the Chick-fil-A parking lot in Asheville with she just had boxes of books that I had to somehow smuggle into my luggage. Sure, I had to leave a few t-shirts at home, but it was totally worth it. And I mean, really my memory of, was seeing the physical space, which seemed like it was going to work out well. And then I do remember, working with Katie, one of the other Peace Corps volunteers, to organize all of those books and all of those resources. And I remember, we had a hard time figuring out what to do with resources, how to organize those. It was definitely a tedious process to catalog all of those, or not even really catalog, but just, figure out what books were there. So I know, I got a little frustrated at one point, but overall, I mean, it seemed like it was going to be a great system. And, I was hopeful that the work that we had done before OLAAT came down was helpful. I know we did as much as we could as far as organizing the books and getting them prepped for cataloging. But it seemed like it was going to be a really great system, and love the fact that there's so much flexibility with it too, depending on the site. Because I mean, obviously not every library is going to be the same. So I'm sure it's really helpful to teachers and librarians, to have that flexibility to either, follow the Dewey Decimal System, or, what other systems are out there, or to kind of figure out how it's going to work on their own.
Yeah, there was a ton, not only the final project for the little library, but the house you and I were working in, and the loads of things we kind of had to sort through. And resources is something that one library at a time is constantly trying to offer new suggestions on, because there's fiction and nonfiction, but then you also want there to be things available reserved only for adults to use in teaching and education, or maybe there's a game section for everybody to use, so I know that was tedious. And then and also too, I'm sure you got a taste of the climate too, because it's
yeah. I think you mentioned before to me, not on this video, but to me, that there was maybe one air-conditioned room in the school, and it was definitely not the library room, I will say. So I definitely remember that. Coming from North Carolina to Panama was quite the culture shock in that regard, but we survived it.
It's if you have never lived in tropical humidity, it's hard to explain. And I still didn't get it, when I first got there. I started understanding pretty quickly, but I remember, so the school days in a lot of Panama goes from maybe 7 to 11:30. Yeah. And then that's the morning turn. and then a whole nother round of students comes through for the afternoon.
Okay.
And I was, kind of like your American mindset is like 4 or 5 hours a day. Like that is nothing. Like they need to be going to school for longer.
Yeah.
You start going into the classrooms with all the teachers and you are pouring sweat underneath your clothes in like the second hour because there's no air conditioning. So you understand real quick why the school days are short and why you only sort of have so much energy to give to a certain setting. Whole conversation about development and kind of how I think things function, and sometimes it seems slow, but it's not. There's not all the conveniences, nor like the perfect climate or springtime, not really existent. Perfect temperature, all that kind of stuff. So and kind of to work in the elements is definitely something.
I don't know how teachers do it in air conditioning, much less without it, with that many kids too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks, Meg, for helping with the One Library at a Time library that you've helped with. Thanks for being a friend to One Library at a Time, and thanks for helping us out on this chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. It's great. I know about it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for watching, everybody. And there'll be some photos posted of the final product of the library that we're talking about in Unión de Azuero. See you next week.
See ya.